I promise you, by the end of this weekend, no matter what team you cheer for, you're going to be absolutely sick of historical stats about the Browns and the Steelers because there are a ton of historical narratives going on about this matchup. You'll hear them in the broadcast. You'll be sick of them by the end of the week. I promise you. But the football, the actual game that's going to be played on the field, doesn't really care about all of those things. Football is a game-to-game sport. It is why the Ravens can lose at home in week 4 to the Browns, and the Ravens can go on to be 14-2, while that Browns team that beat them finishes 6-10. The phrase "any given Sunday" is not some platitude with no reason to exist. It's an astute observation. Football is about matchups. And well, that being said, all of those historical narratives and everything else coming into this game out the way, how do these two teams match up? Well, let's talk about it. Real quick, if you're new here, I want to make sure you guys hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and ding that notification bell so you don't miss a single thing. I got a ton of content coming out during the season, and if you want to make sure you're here when all that content drops, please make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you ding that notification bell. Now, there are a number of interesting trends heading into this game in Pittsburgh. The first one is the Pittsburgh Steelers' run defense. Just look at these numbers through the first 3 weeks. These are great numbers for a run defense to have. Now look at the PFF run grades for each team. Now look at Philly, and boom. The first time this run defense went up against a good run offense, they gave up significantly more yards per carry, and, the Eagles were able to run the ball on them. That's interesting. Here's another interesting set of data, and this time it's about TJ Watt, a legitimate Defensive Player of the Year candidate. And here are TJ Watt's first 3 weeks this NFL season. You see his PFF grade, and you see the PFF grade of the right tackle that he played against in those 3 weeks. And now here is last week versus Lane Johnson. Not a terrible game, but that's a significant and noticeable drop from 90s all across the board to 60s once he played a right tackle that is considered good. And that's interesting. That's very interesting. And see, the reason I brought this up first is I want to address one of the narratives. And the narratives coming into this game is that the Browns are the team being tested this week. When the reality is, and I'm sure Pittsburgh themselves are aware of this reality, is that Pittsburgh's the team that's being tested. Cleveland has already been tested. The Browns had their maturity and locker room mentality tested in week 2 after they got blown out in week 1 by Baltimore. They had to show up to Thursday Night Football and show the world they weren't that same pathetic team that would have lost that game and let that momentum take advantage of them. And then in week 3, the O-line got tested by a Washington team who has one of the better defensive lines in football. In week 4, the defense got tested by Dallas's offense, and also this team got tested to see if they can overcome an offense like Dallas, if they can put enough points on the board to beat a team like Dallas. And in week 5, the O-line got tested again. Also, the offense got tested to see if they can win a game when they don't have a running back rush over 100 yards. Browns have passed all those tests. The Steelers have not been tested. And matter of fact, the small individual tests that the Steelers have went through so far, and it's not a large sample size, and TJ Watt's obviously a good player, but this year they haven't really passed all these tests with flying colors. And that's just going to be something to be interesting to watch, because this game, it's a test of the Pittsburgh Steelers, to be honest with you. But let's talk about some of the other details of the game, and we're going to start with that Steeler defensive line. Now, make no mistake, this Steeler defensive line is really good, and it's the absolute strength of this defense by a particularly large margin in 2020. They have blitzed a lot of times, 83, which is second most in the NFL, despite playing one less game than most other teams. Also, they are number 1 in total pressures, which again is impressive because they have played in one less game than most other teams so far. They're also number 1 in pressure percentage per dropback. PFF has this defensive line ranked number 1 in pass rush, number 4 in run D, and DVOA has them ranked as the number 1 rush defense. they have 4 standouts on this defensive line. TJ Watt, who's one of the best all-around defenders in football. He's good anywhere you put him or anything that you ask him to do. Tyson Alualu, who's been great in a limited role. Stephon Tuitt and Cam Hayward, who've been their usual selves in pass rush situations, but have not been as consistent in run defending. So how does Cleveland and this offensive line hold up against Pittsburgh? I think quite well. Pittsburgh has had a pretty solid and pretty good and consistent interior attack on the defensive line for quite some time. And while they don't have to force Buckner like the Colts do, they're still very good. Now, the bright side for the Browns is that they've already played a better interior rush in Indianapolis, as I do think they have a better interior rush than Pittsburgh, and they already held up against that. Joe Bitonio had one of his best games of the season. J.C. Tretter played at a usual rate, and Chris Hubbard stepped in for Wyatt Teller and played really nice in replacement. I'm not worried about the interior rush against the Cleveland Browns, and I do think it'll open up more running lanes with a guy like DeForest Buckner's presence not being in the inside of that offensive line when they try to get some of these power runs established. The edges are just going to always be the bigger concern when it comes to Pittsburgh, no matter what team you are. Luckily for the Browns, I think their pass protection is well equipped to handle that thing. On the left side, you have Jedrick Wills going up against Bud Dupree, which is a matchup that I like quite fine. I'll live with it. Jedrick Wills has been a pretty decent pass blocker so far through 5 games, and he's played some pretty decent pass rushers so far through 5 games. And then on the right side of the offensive line, the Cleveland Browns have their best pass protector in Jack Conklin, who will be going up on the same side as Pittsburgh's best pass rusher, TJ Watt. Remember, TJ Watt plays on the right side of the defensive line in Pittsburgh. For whatever reason, I don't know. That's just where they like to put him, and that's definitely okay with me. And if the tackles get into any trouble, that's why the Browns have tight ends and use them a lot. And it's even better because the Browns have 3 tight ends who have good pass blocking grades in Harrison Bryant, Stephen Carlson, and surprisingly, David Njoku. I know. If Mike Tomlin's plan is to pressure the offensive line or flat blitz him, I think the numbers indicate that the Cleveland Browns are well equipped to handle that. And along this battle on the line of scrimmage when the Browns have the ball, I think 2 things are very possible. 1, the Browns are going to be able to run the ball against the Steelers defensive line. And 2, they will be able to hold up against his pass rush. And if you can do those 2 things against Pittsburgh, I think there's a lot of things you can take advantage of, and a lot of ways you can move the ball, and a lot of ways you can use play action to take advantage of these really aggressive schemes that Pittsburgh throws out there. That's that side of the ball. Let's flip fields now. Now, I don't think Pittsburgh has a particularly bad offensive line. I think they just have a vulnerable offensive line. To give them credit, they have given up the 11th least pressures allowed in the NFL, 33, but they're 18th in pressures per drop back. So they do give up a decent amount of pressures in relationship to the amount of times the quarterback drops back the pass. And they do that while also being the 4th least blitz offensive line in football. Now, teams don't blitz them for a good reason, because Ben Roethlisberger's there, and Ben Roethlisberger is pretty good when you blitz him. I have to give credit where credit is due. I did not think Ben Roethlisberger would be good this year. I did not think he would be anywhere close to his 2018 form this year. He has been at least as good as 2018, if not better than 2018, because his interceptions are remarkably low for what Ben Roethlisberger has done his entire career. He also has the 4th lowest pocket time with 2.2 seconds in the pocket. That's like one of the lowest in the NFL, but he still has more downfield attempts than Baker Mayfield, somebody who has a 2.8 pocket time or 2.7 pocket time, which is one of the highest in the NFL. So that's been just still somehow, after all these injuries, continuing to be Ben Roethlisberger. And that right there is why I think this offensive line is vulnerable, because yes, the numbers look good, but I think that's more Ben being the duct tape that's holding this offensive line together rather than this offensive line just being legitimately good. If you look at it just piece by piece, you start to see that that offensive line is a little bit shaky, right? They got Matt Filer, who's been pretty good there as a guard, and you have Alejandro Villanueva, who's been kind of a staple at at left tackle for Pittsburgh. But David DeCastro and Mike Pouncey, they've had issues staying healthy. They're not completely healthy right now. They don't know if they're going to play this week. And right tackle, that's been an issue for Pittsburgh ever since Zach Banner got his season-ending injury. And another question is Villanueva. Now, I just said he's not really a question when it comes down to the overall picture of the offensive line, but when it comes down to his matchup against Myles Garrett, yeah, he's definitely a question. In 5 games, Myles Garrett has had 7 sacks and 11 pressures, which by itself is impressive. For Pittsburgh fans, this has to be a concern because Myles seems to have taken a leap. He's entering this game with 6 sacks, 33 pressures, and a forced safety. Now, is this a result of Myles Garrett dominating some lesser left tackles? It definitely can be the case. But for Alejandro, that's just going to be an issue this week because it's always been an issue with Alejandro, his ability to block Myles Garrett. I mean, some of his best games Alejandro has had against Cleveland have been when Myles Garrett just wasn't out there. So Myles, just whether he's hot or not, it's just a matchup problem for him. And it's going to be interesting to see how Myles shows up this week against somebody that he's historically been able to get the better of. And another area of concern for this offensive line is their run blocking. Their running backs, I think, are fine. I think they have a fine crop of running backs. I just think their run blocking has been awful. And to illustrate that point, allow me to read off their 4 best run blockers per Pro Football Focus. Again, take that for what it's worth, but here's who they have graded as the Steelers' best 4 run blockers. James Washington, a wide receiver. Deontay Johnson, a wide receiver. Chase Claypool, a wide receiver. Trey Edmonds, a running back. That's not good. Now, are these areas that the Browns can take advantage of? Yes and no. With a healthy Ogunjobi, absolutely. They can definitely take advantage of that. If Ogunjobi can play his usual amount of snaps, they're going to be able to attack that. The Steelers aren't going to be able to run the ball that much. The Browns have been a little bit up and down when it comes to their ability to stop the run, but they have given up the 5th least rushing yards a game, and they have only allowed 3.88 yards per carry. So the Browns have put up good numbers defensively against the run all season, and they've played decent run competition. But with the Browns, we already know what teams are going to choose to do. They're not going to choose to run the ball when it comes to attacking this Browns team. They're going to pass it. And, well, let's talk about that for the Pittsburgh Steelers. All right, man, long story short about the Ben Roethlisberger matchup with this Cleveland Browns secondary is that, in my opinion, I think Ben is going to have, 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. I think that's just going to happen. The real question isn't can they keep him out the end zone or can they keep his yards down and keep his production down. That's not going to happen. The real question about the Browns defense is can they get the turnovers? Historically, Big Ben has thrown a lot of turnovers, but this year he just hasn't done it. But nonetheless, let me put some of the passing charts up. Here is the Browns defense's passing chart. And you can see that middle deep, which I know a lot of people have their opinions on why that's been an issue, has definitely been an issue. And middle underneath has been an issue. So I would expect the Steelers to do a lot of Chase Claypool, lining up in the slot, going deep down the seam to try to find himself matched up against either a linebacker or a safety. God forbid it's Andrew Sadeo who gets matched up with him. And also, you're going to see a ton of Juju running drag routes with picks underneath. That's just what you're going to see from the Steelers offense, and it's going to work a lot. But if we're going to talk about passing games, we have to talk about Baker Mayfield versus the Steelers secondary. And this is a question that was a concern last year when he played him, when Mika was playing at a top 10 safety level. This year, not necessarily the case. The secondary hasn't really been as great as advertised for Pittsburgh this year. Now, we know when it comes to Baker Mayfield, he's been up and down, but there have been a few things that are consistent with Baker. And those things are as such. No pressure equals good Baker. Blitz, that could be a mixed bag. And pressure equals bad Baker. Baker is at his best when he can attack the sidelines. That's what he does well. He can see that well. He can find his passing windows well. Even if he's not rolling out, he does well in those areas. This is obviously a new offense for Baker Mayfield, so the less he has to decipher, the less he has to think, then the more he can just play football, the better. If you get him on those sidelines, that's where he can do what he does best. That's where he can attack what he does best. And I think that's fortunate for the Browns and unfortunate. Fortunate because I think there's a lot of one-on-one matchups that the Browns should take against the Steelers if the Steelers are so generous to give them to the Browns on the edges. And also I think the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to be more susceptible than people think to the play action, and they're very aggressive. I think the Browns can take advantage of that. But also I think Baker Mayfield's going to be asked to attack the middle of the field here with the tight ends because of how weak these linebackers have been in coverage, and I wonder if Baker's going to be able to do that without turning the ball over. That's going to be one of the things that's going to determine the game. Now let's talk about the game plan for the Cleveland Browns. Okay, for the offense, I think the game plan is going to be relatively simple. Run the ball a lot. I think that's going to be there against Pittsburgh. I think you're going to be able to do it, especially inside. I think you're going to be able to move some space there. Also, attack any one-on-one Pittsburgh gives you on the outside. If you see Joe Hayden and Odell Beckham singled, or Joe Hayden and Jarvis Landry, or Steven Nelson and Odell, or Steven Nelson Jarvis, or Mike Hilton, et cetera, et cetera. If you see any of those guys singled up on Odell or Jarvis, you take that shot, especially if one of those guys are on the same side as Terrell Edmonds. Take the shot. I think you can get it on Pittsburgh. I think it's going to be there. I think the play action's going to be there. I think this defense, while it has better personnel, doesn't create the same matchup issues that Indy did because Indy's really disciplined. Indy's not very aggressive, so they didn't fall for play action. They didn't fall for any of the counters in the run game. They stayed real disciplined. They stayed in their spots, and they got where they were supposed to be, which really stopped a lot of what Cleveland could do offensively. Pittsburgh is not that same team. They're going to be aggressive. They're going to be somebody who could be susceptible to some of this play action and some of these play fakes that the Browns do. And I think you're going to be able to attack them, especially if the offensive line holds up against this pass rush and they got to start blitzing guys. You're going to have opportunities to move the ball downfield in both the run and pass game. Please take advantage of those accordingly and be smart with them. Also, tight ends, tight ends, tight ends. Expect to see the coveted 13 personnel, right, with 3 tight ends on the field. I think you're going to see it here. I think they're going to try their best to exploit how bad those linebackers are in coverage, and it's going to be up to Baker Mayfield to step up and be able to hit some of these guys deep down the middle like he used to be able to do in 2018. That's the plan for the offense. For the defense, there are 4 players that really matter on this defense, we found out. Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, Terrence Mitchell, Kevin Johnson. Why those 4 specific players are so important? Well, I'll tell you. If Myles Garrett gets pressure, everybody else's job becomes a lot easier. If Denzel and Terrence Mitchell can take away the sidelines, that makes the linebacker's job a lot more easy. And if Kevin Johnson in this slot can take away Juju and all those underneath routes that they're going to throw to him and not fall for any of these fakes that they do, it would be great for this defense because, one, you would limit the amount of space your safeties have to cover. We know that's an issue with this team. Also, limits the space that your linebackers have to cover, which has not been an issue because the corners have been playing really well on the outside, condensing that space, which is why you haven't been complaining about B.J. Goodson in coverage anymore since those guys have been playing well. But the key thing for the Browns is that they need to force Ben Roethlisberger to attack the middle of the field. If you can force Ben Roethlisberger to attack the middle of the field, I feel really good about your chances to get him to turn the ball over. One of the reasons Ben Roethlisberger only has 1 interception is because he has drastically toned down how many attempts go to the center portion of this field. Most of his interceptions throughout his career have gone in the center portion of the field. For whatever reason, it's a blind spot for Ben. He throws a lot of interceptions there. So if you're the Browns, you want to force him to throw in that section of the field because that's where you can get turnovers. That's where you can get him to hold the ball. That's where you can get him to hesitate. And that's either going to give time for Myles Garrett to get him, or he's going to force something bad to one of the good corners on the team, Denzel or Terrence Mitchell, or he's going to throw something that can be picked off by one of our linebackers like Malcolm Smith. That's where you win the game. That's where you get the turnovers. We know Andy's going to get burnt. Sheldrick might step up. He might not. We can't depend all on him or put it all on Andy anymore. That's just not the case. And all those things, while legitimate problems, become much more manageable once you condense the field a little bit for them and you get some turnovers. Now, that's my opinion as a football analyst. Now, obviously, you guys know I'm a Browns fan. Obviously, if you're a Pittsburgh fan and you're watching this, you have your ideals in mind. You've probably typed a little comment and called me biased already before the video even started. I'm not worried. In my personal opinion, I think Pittsburgh is a schoolyard bully. I think they've done a great job beating up on weakness. But when you put a strength to them, I don't think they have passed those tests with the flying colors that you would expect an elite defense to pass those tests with. The Browns this week are just going to put a lot of strength to Pittsburgh. It's up to Pittsburgh to pass that test. And I just think right now, with all the evidence that I have through 5 weeks, and this might change after this game, but I think through 5 weeks, the Browns are just a better football team. I think all the football stuff points to the Browns being able to win this game. The mental stuff, yeah, all that points to Pittsburgh, right? The Browns haven't won there in so long. All this stuff about Heinz Field, yeah, it's all there. It's all pointing towards Pittsburgh. And that's what Pittsburgh needs. Pittsburgh wants to intimidate the Cleveland Browns. They want the Browns to get wrapped up in all that Week 11, 2019 nonsense. They need Heinz Field to intimidate this team because they know for a fact through 5 weeks, they're not a better football team than the Cleveland Browns. They're not a more tested football team than the Cleveland Browns. Not this year, not through 5 weeks. So in my opinion, if the Browns show up and play well, I don't see any reason why they shouldn't win. They have a simpler path to victory. I think they have a better team. And the only way I think they can lose is if they get intimidated and they devolve into all that 2019 garbage and nonsense that we hoped we left behind. If they fall into that trap, then they'll lose. And they'll lose big. But if they don't, then they'll win. And it's honestly that simple in my opinion. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Do you think the Browns are going to win, or do you think Pittsburgh's going to win? Let me know your thoughts down there. But again, guys, thank you for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.